Amy Kurtz, welcome to the Tick Bootcamp podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We are really excited to have you, and thank you for taking time out of your life. I know you're a very busy gal with a very busy business. So why don't we talk about first your business? Please describe for us what your business name is and where you are largely providing your services.
I am a holistic health coach and a patient advocate, and I primarily work one-on-one with clients that are on a healing journey, different levels of where they are in their healing. Some people have just gotten diagnosed with something, some feel like they don't know where to go, and I help them through that process and make sure that their healing container is set up properly, that they're seeing the right people for them, that they have the right lifestyle practices, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm also an author. I wrote a book called Kicking Sick, Your Go-To Guide for Thriving with Chronic Health Conditions. And next year, my follow-up book will be coming out in spring 2026.
Holy cow! So you're a busy gal, and congratulations on the first book. I know it was acclaimed, and congratulations, and I'm really excited to learn more about the second book and when that's going to be published. So do we have a name for the second book? Is there
Yes, my second book was just announced last week, and it's called But You Look Fine, Trapped in a Hell Between Sick and Well and How to Break Free.
Oh, I love that title. Oh, I can't wait to read it. So
Thank you.
congratulations, Amy.
Thank you.
So, where is your online presence? If folks wanted to, just right away, learn about how they can come in contact with you, what is your online presence? Where can they find you?
You can find me on my website, which is amykurtz.com, or under my first book titles name, which is kickingsick.com. Or you can find me on Instagram, where where I mostly have my presence online, and it's underscore Amy Kurtz. So please say hi.
So, Amy, I want to compliment you on the website. It is a really elegant website. I was really impressed with the quality of the work. Most websites just suck. They just aren't many really good websites out there. And yours is just really, really well done. So
I'm honored that you think that. Thank you.
very well done. So let's walk it back a little bit because we do have to introduce folks to you, not just professionally, but we have to introduce folks to you. So I know you're currently a New Yorker, so welcome to New York, but you're not a native New Yorker, right? So where are you from?
I grew up in the suburbs outside of Philadelphia.
So you're a Pennsylvania gal, and when give us a context about when were you growing up in the suburbs of Philadelphia?
I was born in 1984, and I lived there with my family until I went to college in 2003. Um, so I lived right outside of the city of Philadelphia, sort of had the best of both worlds. A lot of nature where I lived, but close to a city.
Now, when you were growing up in and around the Philly area, in the suburban Philly area, were you aware that Pennsylvania had the highest rate of Lyme disease actually in the country?
No, and that surprises me now. So I really didn't.
Yeah,
I really
so
felt like nobody around me knew much about it. It was never something that was talked about.
yes, and unfortunately, it doesn't surprise me that you were not aware of that, right? Because not only are we failed by our educational systems, but we're also failed by our culture and the cultural support, right? So even though you come from a good family and you have parents who want to make sure that you have as good an experience as you can, they weren't aware that you were living in the Line Belt. They weren't aware that every day that when you had gone outside, you had the potential to come in with ticks feeding on you. And because they weren't aware of that, they couldn't put you in a position where you could protect yourself, and they weren't taking steps to try to protect you from, what results in you getting sick, right?
Yeah, I think they did the best they could, and they just weren't aware of it. And through all the doctors that we saw when I was 14, when my symptoms started, nobody mentioned it. Not one person. And I was like a very lively kid. I was always barefoot running outside between my neighbors' houses and just very um lively and vivacious and always wanting to be outside. So now that you're saying, like, yeah, okay, well, yep, confirms
Yeah.
my suspicions.
Yes. So again, there is always this bouncing back and forth between Connecticut, New York, and Pennsylvania with having the highest rates. But there were certainly large periods of time during your childhood where Pennsylvania had the largest number of Lyme disease cases, as it does right now. I think last year Pennsylvania had the largest number of Lyme disease cases per capita cases, and actually certainly in the U.S. and probably in the world. So you were in the thick of it. You were in the Lyme Belt, right? And nice little Amy, who's full of life and full of energy and bouncing back and forth and rolling around in the grass and doing all the things that an energetic kid would do, was getting bitten by ticks, right?
Mhm.
She was getting bitten by ticks, and unfortunately, you were getting sick. So talk to us about when your symptoms first surfaced. You did begin to foreshadow that it was around the age of 14.
Yeah, when I was 14, I went to field hockey camp with one of my friends, and I remember really clearly getting home from practice and just feeling like my back didn't feel right. I was aware of pain, which I had never been before my whole life. And other than acute things, like if you stub your toe or, like hurt yourself playing outside or in sports. But this was a different kind of pain. And then it evolved into one day I was in my childhood bedroom and I bent down to get a textbook off of my floor and I felt this shooting pain go up my spine from the base to the top and almost like a muscle spasm all in the same moment. And I remember kind of waddling into my dad's office and saying, something's wrong. I don't even think I can stand up right now. And um, that really started me on my journey of trying to find the right doctors. I come from a very Western-minded medical family. I have a lineage of doctors in my family. My father's one of them. And they took me to the best specialists with what they knew. And everybody did really thorough exams. And I went to a bunch of different people, pain management specialist, an internist, a neurologist, because the pain went from just being muscle pain to nerve pain, where I would feel like if I was sitting at my desk doing work and somebody came in the room behind me from so far away from me, my nerves would jump out of my skin. And I mean, my parents really tried the best with what they had. And unfortunately, nobody ever mentioned Lyme. Nobody ever did a blood test for anything like that. And the answer when I was a 14-year-old was to put me on anti-inflammatories and muscle relaxers and send me to physical therapy. And that was really the first moment where the axis in which I lived and functioned as a person totally shifted because I was in chronic pain. And these things helped, but really they were only numbing the issue and they were never really getting rid of it. So everything just shifted around me now being this young kid who's in pain. And like anyone who's listening to this who is female knows that being a 14-year-old girl is hard enough. So it just added another layer of confusion and um my priorities shifted to managing making sure I felt okay.
So let's talk about how your life changed. You started to share with us that you were an athlete. You came home from field hockey camp. So after you started to deal with these symptoms, did that alter your ability to participate in athletics? And if it didn't, did it alter your ability to perform at the level you were hoping to perform at?
100% it changed my ability to do what I wanted to do. I always had to think about what was going to potentially exacerbate my back pain. I was a dancer at the time and I that was what I loved to do the most. And I just couldn't get through any of the classes without having pain. And unfortunately, the doctor's response was then you maybe you shouldn't be dancing. So I gave it up and I am resilient and I pivoted my love for dance to acting and the performing arts. But there were definitely things that I gave up. I was able to play sports because I was on, I guess, medications that were helping me feel well enough. But I just was always aware of being uncomfortable and in low grade pain. I remember seeing a neurologist who was really well respected and she did very thorough testing. But I even just confirmed with my mom before this podcast that even she didn't say anything about it potentially being Lyme related. And then I went to see an internist, I saw a pain management specialist, um, and definitely a couple other people. And then it became, when there were no clear answers, it became about how do we like mitigate the pain? And I started to go to acupuncture and do physical therapy. And I would do these physical therapy exercises every day for like 10 years.
And we'll focus on that for a second because I think there probably was some benefit to you doing that. But let's focus on one of the things you've already highlighted and we talk about on this podcast all the time, right? One of the things that we shared with folks on this podcast is we interviewed Phyllis Bedford from the Limelight Foundation, and one of the things she said to us was that Lyme disease is the supermarket diagnosed disease. And we go, what do you mean by that, Phyllis? She said, you're more likely to be diagnosed with Lyme disease in the supermarket when you bump into someone whose family had the same symptoms than you
Yes,
are if you're going to go to your doctor's office, right?
I
And
think
that,
that's true.
and that was certainly your experience, right? So,
Yes.
which I think does highlight again the challenges with this disease um, from the standpoint of having an Eastern or a Western medicine doctor diagnose you is not that they're not smart enough to diagnose us. It's not that they don't have a desire to diagnose us. It's not even that they don't have enough time to spend with us to diagnose us. It's that they simply don't have the training to ultimately see what it is that's right before their eyes, right? They're looking through a particular prism. And when they're looking through that prism, they don't see Lyme because they don't have those frameworks uploaded into their brain when they're studying to practice medicine.
Hmm. Yeah, and I just spoke with my mom and she said not one person that we saw ever even mentioned it. Ever, it wasn't even like maybe you should get a test. There was just nothing. It was as if Lyme didn't exist in the 90s.
And it's as if Lyme didn't exist in Pennsylvania in the 90s, right? You know, it would be one thing to argue that it was a little bit harder to diagnose in another part of the world or another region in the US, but you're living in the East Coast, right? You're in the Line Belt. You're a stone's throw away from Connecticut,
Hmm.
and where you know where this disease got its name. And you are seeing some of the best doctors in the world, all of whom are working overtime to try to diagnose one of their colleagues' children who hopefully they believe, right? I mean, I do want to talk to you about that. You know, there is a lot of gaslighting in, you know, in the pre-diagnostic stage of many people's journeys.
Yes.
Um, did you feel any of that, or do you think you were protected from that as a result of being the child of a doctor?
I've certainly experienced so much of that in my later life. Um, and that's a huge thing to overcome as a patient, and to manage. But I don't have memories of that time period feeling as if somebody was suggesting that it was in my head.
Okay.
You know,
So,
I think that so many people have doctors who say, well, you look healthy, you know, or but you look fine. But
ergo, the title to book number two.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I don't remember having that feeling. And anybody who's listening who has had that feeling, it is visceral when you feel that somebody is doubting what you're saying is true about your body. And I didn't feel that then, but I certainly have felt that over and over and over again as an adult managing all of this.
And I do want to talk to you more about gaslighting and the impact that it has on you emotionally and physically, but let's hit the pause button on that part of the conversation until we get to your adult years. Let's stay with your childhood. Um, so you did share with us that that there were some steps that you took to manage the disease,
Mhm.
the undiagnosed disease.
Yeah.
And one of the things that my co-host Matt generally does is he likes to talk about um, some of the positive steps that people take that allow them to manage the disease or the symptoms of the disease before they're diagnosed, right? Because there are many things that you can do um, and change what might otherwise be unhealthy um, um, health practices that will allow your immune system to manage this disease despite not being diagnosed and despite not being treated as well as you could when you are properly diagnosed. So
Mhm.
talk about the kinds of things that the doctors were having you do with your diet, with your movement, with your sleep, and other types of support that you were able to utilize to keep yourself at least in a position where you could manage the disease before you were diagnosed.
Well, I will say that not one person mentioned diet or sleep. And as you know, the standard American diet, specifically in the 90s, is aptly named SAD because it's totally inflammatory and not good for us at all. And I was certainly a kid in the 90s who was eating all the processed foods that I could get my hands on. And that was just never, nobody said that. Nobody said that. And I'm still shocked about it when I think back because it's one of the things that I think help people the most. What I did do is I went to acupuncture, which definitely mitigated the pain I was having. But as I look back as an adult, and I do value acupuncture very much so, especially from a stress reduction place. And it's helped me substantially in various different ways. I I wonder if at that time that really was very physically and emotionally stressful for me as a teenager, if it really helped me to stay calm in uncharted waters more than I realized. That's
So,
only something I've thought about recently.
I mean, I'm kind of surprised that the daughter of a Western medical practitioner makes her way to a acupuncturist during her childhood. So,
I know.
give us that. So, how did that happen? How does
My
that?
my uh the pain management doctor that I saw said that he thought that that might be helpful. So he did that, and he did an electric stimulation machine where I'm not going to say it properly. I'm not going to explain it correctly, but he was just doing a bunch of different things and thought maybe that that would be something that would help me. So I did it.
And did it?
Yeah. Um, it did, but it can only do so much when you're not getting to the root of the problem.
Okay, so again, we're just focusing on the things that were either helping you to manage the disease or helping you to manage the symptoms of the disease. So no one
Yeah,
ever
I,
told.
I think the thing that helped the most was the physical therapy
Okay,
because it, one, got me into a more of an exercise routine where I was um, really able to connect with my body differently. Like I went from being in such severe pain to then being put on these medications to then being able to move again. And I think that was really, really important. And just doing the exercises every day, whether or not they really worked that much. I mean, I don't think they really worked all that well because I was still in a lot of pain, but I think it gave me a connection to my body and a way to be um, part of a solution in a situation that felt very out of control. And I think that anything that people can do um, to be their own advocate and to like be embodied in something that is so challenging or have agency over themselves. It gave me something to work towards, even if even if it wasn't even close to the solution. So I
Okay.
think mentally that helped me.
So absolutely, and we certainly know that the emotional impacts that movement and exercise has on you is always going to be positive, right? So let's talk about your diet sucked, right? You were just eating the classic American diet, and of course, one of the challenges with having a bad diet is we're adding to the toxic load that our body is carrying, right? So no one identified diet as a tool that at the time that might be helpful to you. So you're just doing what all young kids do at the time, eating crap, right? So toxic load is going up with the food, right? Now we have movement, right? And you just talked about a number of different important pieces of movement. The you know the chemical properties that cause us to feel better. Where you were getting that benefit. You were learning more about your body, and you were connecting with your body, and you were becoming more confident in understanding the signals and what they meant, and learning more about your onboard diagnostic system. And of course, movement also gives us another benefit, which is, of course, detoxification, right? It allows us to have the movement that allows these toxins to come out of our body. So your diet is increasing the toxic load. Of course, we know that the bugs in your system are increasing your toxic load, but now at least we have some movement that's allowing us to dispel some of this because of the movement, right? So we have a couple of negative things going on, or at least one positive thing going on. What about sleep? Anybody talking about sleeping, the importance of
No.
of um, of of,
No.
of sleep, and not only the emotional impact that sleep will have on you and the physiological benefits, but of course the detoxification, because the only way that our brain detoxes is when we go to sleep, and the lymphatic system can drain during the course of our sleep.
Not that I remember, no.
So how was your sleep? Was your sleep good or bad at the time?
Well, I was in pain, so I was on a muscle relaxer, which helped me sleep.
Well, and the question is, what kind of sleep were you getting then, right? Because you have to have the right kind of sleep in order to be able to have the proper detox. So maybe that was good, maybe that was bad, right? I mean, and what that's an important sort of question that we have to ask when we're taking those types of medications, and we have that type of sleep, whether or not the sleep that we're getting when we're being drugged up, or we're using some other tool to help us sleep. So we'll make that a neutral back then, from the standpoint. Um, any other things that you were doing other than taking muscle relaxers? You were taking you were going to you had the benefit of the physical therapy. You're now using some Eastern tools like acupuncture. Anything else that you were doing at that time that helped you to manage these challenges? Which again, I know you want to talk about how that limited your ability to get diagnosed, but I promise that we'll get there in a minute. Let's talk about what else you were doing and how it was either helping or not helping.
No, that's really it. I mean, I was on the anti-inflammatories, which I think helped. I was on something else for like nerve pain. I don't know if it helped. I was on so much stuff that like it was complicated. I didn't necessarily feel drugged up because um it wasn't as if I was taking like a heavy duty pain medication, but um I just really pushed myself to like go in a direction towards something else that made me so happy outside of what I was physically feeling, which was performing. And that became a huge outlet for me. And just having that outside of everything else that was going on was really helpful. I do want to say that I just like a year ago met with one of my camp friends from when we were around that time, and she made a comment to me like where she said, I remember you doing physical therapy on the floor of our camp room while we all were like running around being crazy teenage girls. And I just remember thinking like I can't believe she has to do this every day. And it really like took me back for a moment because I just thought this is what I have to do to feel okay. So I wasn't even thinking about the context in which how it maybe it came out to other kids who never had to think about anything like that.
Right.
kind of
Well,
like,
yeah,
whoa.
and it was what you had to do, right? It's what you had to do in order for you to manage this as best you could as you could manage it. So let's talk about camp because we've had many guests on this podcast who were bitten by ticks during their camping experience. And one
Mhm.
of the things that we find frustrating is even to this day, summer camps are not training their counselors on how to train the campers on how to check themselves and ultimately what to do in the event that they find a tick on themselves. So was that your experience that you went to camp and certainly had a good experience because camping is a very enriching experience, but
Mhm.
was it your experience that there was no training or education on how to check yourself and how to deal with ticks in the event that you find a tick on you?
Nobody said anything ever. Really. I really didn't even learn that much about Lyme disease until much later in my life.
Okay.
And I was in the woods in Connecticut, so they should have.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that where your camp was in Connecticut?
Mhm.
Okay. So that's
Just moved from one to the other.
you went from the frying pan into the fire, and nobody put a flame retardant suit on you before you got dumped into the fire, right?
No.
So Amy, so share with us how your artistic outlets were helpful to you in managing the physical and emotional challenges that this disease was presenting.
I think that when I was like in high school and then I went to college for the performing arts, I really it gave me the ability to express myself. You know, you're when you're acting, you're expressing yourself through somebody else's story, and it gave me the ability to, you know, channel some of those big emotions that I was feeling that I didn't even know I was feeling when I was younger and put it into something creative, which I always feel is, at least for me, I'm a highly creative person and I even when I was very, very young, I was always around art and culture and for me it just gave me a place that I could feel free and my spirit could feel, you know, replenished where when I was in pain, I was feeling the opposite.
So one of the things we've learned from people who are in a lot of pain from Lyme disease is that they often have what some have called an out of body experience where their spirit is separating from the sick body, that they need to get away from the sick body. And one of the things they have to do is they have to bring their spirit back into their body in order to be able to go on the healing journey. That separation is not healthy. Do you think that
Mm.
what acting allowed you to do is at least have a temporary separation from the sick body that you were unfortunately being forced to drag around, and maybe that outlet was not only something that was enriching on so many levels that you had just defined, but maybe getting out of your body was something that was giving you relief from this difficult physiological experience that you were having.
It's certainly possible. I really never thought about it like that, and I've never heard that before, but yeah, it makes a certain amount of sense to me, for sure.
Yeah, we've had many guests talk to us about this out of body experience that they've had. One guest once shared with us was that she couldn't heal because she was sort of like dragging this sick body around, like her spirit was dragging the sick body around, and she was separating from the sick body. And part of what she had to do was through some spiritual and emotional therapy and other interventions. She had to come back into her body so that she can go through the process of healing. But it sounds to me
That's
like
interesting. I I do feel sorry I interrupted you,
no,
but
no, no. There's no interruption. We're having a conversation.
I do feel like for me, it was mostly about just having an outlet for my emotions. I think like when you're playing somebody else or you're involved in a community which feels like a family, it felt freeing for me to just it was just an outlet for me to express my feelings. And
You
I
know,
didn't have that
I
early.
I think it's awesome. I really do think it's awesome, right? Because you know we always focus on the physiological elements of this disease and the physiological pain because I think we have language that allows us to better describe physical pain than to describe emotional pain, right? We just don't have the language. Uh, but but Lyme disease is a physically devastating disease. It's an emotionally devastating disease, and it's a spiritually devastating disease. But we can't sort of talk about those other levels of what, you know, we describe ourselves as physical beings, as emotional beings, and as spiritual beings, but we don't really have language to describe the emotional and the spiritual. And because of that, we struggle with trying to find ways of offsetting those pains, but you were able to do that, right? I mean, it was your artistic pursuits that allowed you to have emotional and spiritual relief.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really cool. So the good news is, you know, this suffering young person is able to get relief from her physical pain, in part because of some of the tools that she was using that were given to her from the medical community, both Eastern and Western medical community. She was able to get relief from the emotional pain and the spiritual pain as a result of her creative endeavors and her artistic endeavors. But of course, that's limiting your ability to get a diagnosis, right? So talk to us about what it was like to get through this journey up to the time that you had written your book, because you still hadn't been diagnosed and you had written your book. So give us that piece of your journey, how you were able to get through this and you were able to, you know, to be healthy and creative and even write a book. But perhaps those tools that you're using to mask all of these pains may have limited your ability to get a diagnosis.
Yeah. I'm just smiling because I I think that's kind of funny what you said about the acupuncture. Like, how did that work its way into the whole thing? I don't know. And it's the first time I've actually thought that's so true. So it just was making me laugh while you were speaking. But um after what we shared, I I went to college for acting. I lived in upstate New York. I felt that I was masking the pain that I was in pretty well. Later, I found out that maybe I wasn't masking it as well as I thought that I was. And it's sad to even think that I felt like I had to do that in the first place. But um, in college, just things, I felt pretty good, but things that normal kids do were just harder for me. Like, if my friends and I went out and we went to a party, it would take me so much longer to recover than they would. They would be up the next day and like nothing happened. And for me, it just, if I got a cold, it took longer. Looking back, I now can piece these two big things in my life to Lyme, but I just didn't know at the time. So I just thought that's just me. And I got the monovirus and it affected me very, very intensely. I had to leave school. I almost couldn't go back the following semester, but I pushed myself to do it probably too fast. But I just got very ill from that. And in a way that nobody else around me was getting sick. I mean, they would get sick because mono is really hard, but not the way that I did. Um, and then after college, I moved to New York City. I was pursuing acting. You know, this whole life of being in a consistent amount of pain just was my new normal since I was 14. So I was just living like that was me. And and then I took a trip abroad when I was 25 and I went to Israel in a program called Birthright and I had an amazing time. And then about a few weeks in, I was starting to feel really sick really fast in a way that I had never experienced before in my life. And it is as intense as it sounds. I gained 30 pounds in 30 days. I couldn't keep food down. I couldn't go to the bathroom. I had rashes all over my skin. I could barely take a deep breath. My hair was starting to fall out. I was walking up the Masada behind like the oldest people in a tour group ahead of me, and I could barely keep up with them. And I just felt so out of control so fast. And I knew that something was seriously, seriously wrong. Um, I think that I likely had eaten something that didn't agree with me. And now that I know what I know, I think that this was like the one, two, three, strike, you're out. I came home from my trip. I tried to regulate myself with eating healthy and just trying to figure out how to do things on my own for a couple of days. It wasn't working. It was getting worse. And I called my parents and said, "You have to come and get me. Something is seriously wrong. And um, I'm scared. So can you come pick me up?" And they did. And I was unrecognizable. I'm a small person. I had gained so much weight. I was eh, I was just not myself. And I used my dad's resources and I went to like all of the best people at the hospital because I really needed to be acutely evaluated. There was something really wrong and it felt like an emergency inside of me. And again, people gave me tips and things that I could maybe do to help me, but even at that point I said, "Well, what about my diet?" And the gastro said, "What do you mean? Like what? You don't really need to do anything differently." And I'm like, "But I'm in so much pain and I clearly can't keep food down or go to the bathroom, like something." So anyway, that was my moment where I'm like, I have to save my own life and I'm gonna have to figure out how to do that. So I went online, I found a functional medicine doctor near me. They recommended I went to see this GI specialist at Hopkins. I did. Um, it was challenging to make that choice because it was so different than anything I ever knew. It wasn't something that I knew would be a sure shot. And I did feel like I was in an emergency, but I also felt so desperate that I had to go down a different road that was totally different than what I knew. And I, when people experience acute stress like that, for a lot of people, myself definitely included, I was like, this is where I save my life because nobody else is going to do it except for me. And I went to see this physician. He was so smart. He was really like a very perfect balance of Western and Eastern medication. He really cared about diet. He taught me so much. He he thought that I had parasites. I did 5 tests and the fifth one came back positive. So then, and also I was diagnosed with celiac disease. So once I stopped eating gluten or stopped having gluten and focused on not eating inflammatory foods, it made a huge difference in how I felt. But I was still drowning from all of these new symptoms. I went to the best parasite specialist in New York City. He found it right away. He took me in, he put me on medication, and um, within a week, I had felt so much stronger. Not strong enough, but so much stronger. And then um, it was discovered that my thyroid was pretty much failing, and I was just so low in thyroid, and I saw another functional medicine doctor, and this is like really as long-winded as it seems. This doctor made me feel better, but then ended up giving me too much medication. So it was like just this crazy chaos storm. I was a 25-year-old kid. I still consider that a kid.
I
I
do too.
All of my friends were figuring out who they wanted to be. They were free after college and creating their own destinies and figuring out who they were in the world and who they were as a person. And I was just thrust into this really intense, chaotic medical maze. Um, and I feel so lucky that I have the resources and the privilege to be able to have figured it all out. And I don't take that for granted for a second, but it was just like being in a tidal wave. Um, and then I went to see a very well-known functional medicine specialist. He helped me tremendously um, with a lot of things, with the celiac component, with the thyroid component, um, with detoxification, with making sure I had enough vitamins and minerals in my body after the parasite infection. And he made me feel good enough. But you have to understand that I didn't feel well for so long that I didn't even know what good felt like anymore. So to me, it felt good then. But to me now, Amy now, who's halfway through all of the Lyme treatments, I was treading water completely every
So
single
let's,
day.
so you've given us a very, very rich narrative, which I could use for a whole other podcast episode. But let me hit a couple of the
Okay, I'll
highlights
see you next
that I
time.
want to.
Just kidding.
Yes. So this, I mean, that was really a beautiful description of this journey, right? And what I'm always looking for is what opportunities were missed by the medical community that could have given us clues to a better path to a diagnosis. Um, so as soon as you started talking about mono, my ears went up, right? Because we've had this experience so many times on this podcast where uh, where where the people we interviewed had a suppressed immune system, right? Because the Lyme was suppressing their immune system. Their toxic bucket was now spilling over. Um, and the virus that presents, or the microbe that presents, is mono, right? And because Western medicine doctors are trained to look for one disease or one cause, right? What happens is they're now just looking at this one, they're looking at this one virus in your case, right? And they're treating this one virus in that case and not looking at the terrain, right? And because they're not looking at the terrain and they're not looking for larger causes and they're not thinking, hey, this is just what's presenting, but we have somebody whose toxic bucket is now overflowing. We have somebody whose immune system is failing. What they do is they just try to treat the one thing, right?
Yes.
And again, I wanted to highlight that because we've seen this so many different times, and for people who are newer to this journey, um, that was an opportunity for your doctors to think Lyme, right? There was an opportunity to get to a diagnosis, but because they're looking for one bug for one disease, they thought by treating the one presentation that you were going to get better, but in fact, that that was not the case. You ultimately got to a point where you crashed. I mean, you had multi-system failure, as you were describing, with your thyroid and other systems that were failing. Why? Because you became so toxic, right? But
Yeah.
even when you went to and even when you went to the functional medicine doctors, um, what they were doing was they were sending you to places like, all right, this is the parasitic expert, right? So now we have another presentation and we're looking for one now bug. So now instead of treating a virus, now we're going to treat a parasite, right? Because what we know is what Lyme does to us is that it suppresses our immune system, right? So all of these various bugs that we've picked up over our lives, or these various microbes we picked up over our lives, when our immune system is healthy, it's managing all these things, right? But then when our immune system gets suppressed, what happens is they all start to take off, right? And now we're playing whack-a-mole, and the doctor's like, all right, we'll treat this one today, and now we'll send you another specialist, and now we'll treat that one, and now we'll send you another, and that's what your experience was, where they kept looking for the one bug that was causing the illness, and they treat the one bug, and you start feeling better. But what happens is you're still getting sick, right? And you're still getting sicker, and you're still getting sicker, and now we don't have acute symptoms anymore. Now you're chronically ill. Now you're really, really sick. You have multi symptoms, multi organ failure, multi system failure. So where do we go from here?
Um, where do we go from here? I felt like I was finally with the right functional medicine doctor. And like I said, they did give me certain treatments and IVs, and they did help me, but tremendously, but not enough. And I didn't realize, like I was saying, I felt as though I was better, but I now know that I wasn't better enough. And um, within this story, I had um, I just woke up from a dream one day and said to my now husband, I'm going to write a book. And he's like, what are you talking about? Because I was taking things into my own hands and I was looking everywhere, and all I could find were books that were like how to be sick and tired or how to just be unwell. And I'm like, I'm a 26, 7-year-old woman. Like, I'm not going to just accept that this is going to be my reality for the rest of my life. This is crazy. So I decided I was going to write a book and feature all of the experts and doctors and thought leaders that I have learned from along the way. I really educated myself before this in my own experience with both Western and Eastern medicine. I tried everything, landed somewhere in between. And um, and I wanted to feature other women's stories, but I wanted to um, shortcut what can be an extremely isolating and lonely experience for people who are young and who don't feel well and who feel misunderstood and isolated from their peers. And I wanted to create like it's a love letter from my heart, so that people could open to any page, because if they're like me, I've had a lot of cognitive dysfunction where it's hard for me to read for prolonged periods of time, or it was. And I put a lot of my energy, like that soul energy, spirit energy we were talking about, into this book. And in a lot of ways, it saved me. It really saved my spirit to do this for other people and put my a purpose to my pain. Um, at that time, I was like good enough. And I clearly still had so many things going on, but it just felt like really overwhelming. And like in my medical process, I was throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick. And I was on so many things. I had no idea what was doing anything anymore. And I would do anything that anyone told me to do. I just wanted to hand it over to a doctor and say, like, just tell me what to do and I will do it. I will be an A+ student. Let's fix this. But I forgot myself along the way. And I didn't listen to my instincts, because part of the experience of being a chronically ill patient in our country is that very often times you're told that your instinct isn't as important as what a doctor has to say. And so you just hand over the power to the best specialist or the best person, and you lose yourself along the way. Like, I certainly lost myself. I would always feel a very strong intuition about things, but I would always defer to what they said was best for me instead of listening to the voice inside myself that always knows my body better than anybody. Um, so I did this book. I am so proud of it. And um, it really started a ripple effect. And I heard from so many young patients saying that they'd never said things that I said on TV out loud, and that they saw themselves in me. And it was very, very rewarding. I set out to be like, if I help one person, it's worth it. Um, and I was fortunate enough to get really good press for it, because it was at a time when nobody was talking about it. We now live in a different world where people are much more vocal about not feeling well and being really honest. But I was, until like before this book came out and a few other books in a similar lane, um, I really felt like I was just wearing a mask and not really being able to say what was going on, because I looked healthy enough, but I felt like I was dying inside. And um, I had to do so much to manage just feeling okay. It was really like treading water. So at that point, I get great press for the book. I, if I'm being fully honest, was like at the end of every day was like, I don't have the energy for this. I don't know how I'm going to meet this moment tomorrow. And I would kind of beat myself up about it. But looking back, it's like it just came at a time where I wasn't ready to rise to the occasion because I wasn't well enough.
Well, but let's pause there because there are three things I want to talk with you about. Uh,
Okay.
because this again, you are a gifted speaker, and I really appreciate the way you're building this narrative. The first thing I forgot to talk to you about is your birthright trip.
Okay.
Um, and of course, it's a beautiful opportunity for Jewish people to go to Israel,
Mhm.
and to have that experience. And of course, I could understand that culturally, and wanting to experience, a trip to Israel, something I desire to do myself. But but also, it starts to give you some opportunities to now go through some spiritual healing, right? Because we are physical beings, we are emotional beings, and we are spiritual beings, right? And one of the most devastating parts of this journey that you went on, and I think everybody who goes on a Lyme disease journey, is you lose your rudder. One of the things you said earlier in our interview was, or I should say, this conversation was, when you turned 25 and all your friends were on their way and they were finding their purpose and they were pursuing their dreams and they were doing the things that you're supposed to be doing after you graduate from college, and you have now the freedom to find yourself and find your purpose and find the people you're supposed to serve. You couldn't do that because you were sick. You were so sick you had to call your parents and they had to come and pick you up, right? And remember, we are, as spiritual beings, put here to serve other people. We have a piece of God's creativity in us, and we're supposed to serve other people. And you're so sick, you can't serve anyone. You can't take care of yourself. You have to come home, right? So now you're now looking for, your spirit is looking for spiritual enrichment, and you go on this birthright trip, but you get sick, right? And we've seen that pattern over and over again, which is why I want to talk with you about it, because travel is immunosuppressive, right? Air travel in particular is immunosuppressive. And in many cases, what that does, it adds again to our toxic load, and it puts us in a position where we become sicker because we've done some travel, right? And it's one of the things that, I've shared with folks on this podcast. We were recently invited to serve as the official podcast for the ILADS conference. It was a really cool experience. But my co-host Matt couldn't come with me. I had to do that alone because Matt was afraid to fly. He's not flown despite being in a very good place, because he was afraid of the immunosuppressive nature of the flight. And it's one of the things we're working on, because he really wants to join me next year because we've been invited back to do that. So talk to us about that piece of it, that the travel and the desire to go on this trip and the spiritual elements of that trip, and talk about how perhaps the travel caused the physiological problem that actually did not allow you to have the same spiritual experience you might have otherwise had.
I can't speak to the travel component. I don't know. What I do know is that I ate something weird there, and after that moment, I couldn't keep food down or go to the bathroom. I knew it the second after I ate it. I was like, something is wrong here. So even just being able to experience food in another culture threw me off. And I'm sure, I mean, the flight to Israel is so long, so you definitely have a point, and it's actually really smart. And I honestly have never thought about it in that way. I know that I am a little exacerbated when I come back from trips, but it's never something that like totally has knocked me out. And then in Israel, I've always been a seeker my whole life. I come from a very Reformed Jewish family. My grandparents were immigrants, and I really had been to Israel when I was younger, and I wanted to go back and experience this amazing free trip with my friends. And there's something so special about that land and the people that live there. And so really, I just wanted to absorb myself into the culture and the spirituality. And I definitely I've always been looking for how to deepen my connection with myself and other people.
So now let's talk about the next piece of your spiritual journey, which was writing this book,
Hmm.
right? Because as people of God, we understand that that God is a creative being, and God puts a piece of His creativity in each one of us, and that we're not going to feel spiritually healthy if we're not serving other people. And the way you did that was by writing this really beautiful book, right? You were now serving, not only at a time, but at a place that had been unique. And so talk about how that was helping you spiritually, how that was helping you to heal, how that book was a healing experience for you, because it allowed your spiritual bucket to be filled up with the kind of love that you can only feel when you're serving other people consistent with your purpose.
Hmm. Oh, it makes me cry. I Well, I want to just go back for a second and say that when I was younger, I went to a Quaker school. So the heart of the Quaker community is service, and that was something that I grew up doing every single week of my life. So it's been a really ingrained part of me. And um, the book, I
Well, it's also ingrained in you because it's a part of the Jewish culture, and it's not just the Quaker.
yeah,
It's
but I
also
did go
at the
to
heart of
Quaker school
Judaism.
and have
Yeah.
service every week. But yes, yes, yes. And thank you for saying that. And I just really felt that this was something I had to do. I literally, like I said, woke up from a dream and told my husband I was going to write the book. And he said, "What do you mean? How are you going to write this?" And I said, "I'll figure it out, but this is what needs to be out there, so I'm going to do it." And I did. And um it was very healing for me to I not only was helping others, I was helping myself. I was healing so much pain, like emotional pain from having gone through this my whole life and sharing my story. And when people share, they feel healed, and that is a really beautiful thing. And I have privilege, and I was able to see a lot of people along the way that most people won't have access to. And I really felt like it was my mission to be able to make things more accessible to people, and also really to have a situation that could be so life-defining and sidelining and give people ways to make it transformative instead of totally defining and like your life ends there. Because for me, that's when spirituality became a huge part of my life. Um, After that book. And I'm just so grateful for the experience, and I was so grateful to be able to help other people.
But Amy, you wrote this book. You're getting a lot of press, but you're not doing well, right? You're physically getting sick again, right? It's so your spiritual journey was not over yet. You hadn't
No,
gotten to a diagnosis yet. So even though you had written the book and you were serving the way you were created to serve, and you were now able to help other people on their journeys, and you were able to give voice and language to the challenges that many other people were suffering that wasn't available. You were not yet there, right?
no.
You didn't have your diagnosis yet. And because you didn't have your diagnosis, despite having a desire to continue to serve and to get this message out, Amy got sick again, right?
Yeah, after the press wound down after kicking sick, I just was like so tired and having a lot of what I called flare-ups, which I now know are Lyme. And I said, I had this like devastating conversation where I said, I thought that I really had it figured out, and I definitely don't. And um, I know anybody listening to this who's been through this will understand it takes so much courage and financial resource and um, just so much energy to decide you're going to go see another doctor, especially when you are a very, very highly complicated patient and you've been through a lot and your medical records look like the Harry Potter anthologies, as mine does. And um, I just knew that I had to just change my team and go in a different direction. And I mustered up the strength, and I was ready for heartbreak and more disappointment. And I went to see a specialist in New York, and he ran all the tests again. And I was prepared to have nobody else really figure out anything simple. Like it had never been straightforward. It had always just been so many things at once. And after a couple months of him doing really extensive tests and asking me a million questions, I went into his office and I sat down, and he said, "Okay, so everything's back." And in a very matter-of-fact tone, he said, "I'm very, very clear that you have late-stage neurological Lyme disease and multiple co-infections." And the second he said it, I still get the chills now because it was like every bone in my body knew that it was true. And up until this, I had been like, well, at least it's not Lyme. Like, at least that's not what's going on because I had seen it be so complicated for so many people, but I knew it was right. I felt relief because I had never given up on myself. I had never just said, okay, I'm just going to accept the way that this is. And I fought for myself and I felt proud of that. But I also felt tremendous, tremendous grief for the decades of my life that were spent only focused on getting better.
So let's take another, let's turn that prism and look at it a little bit differently.
Okay.
Because I really love this story. I don't just love you and the way you're describing the story, but I really love the story itself. And I just want to look through the prism with you a little bit differently, right? Because another way of looking at our life's experiences is that all of them are designed for us to become the person we're supposed to be so that we can serve the way we're supposed to serve, right?
Yes.
And one way of looking at this journey is to look back and say, holy cow, had I had a different diagnosis at an earlier stage, I wouldn't have had to go through all the suffering that I had to go through. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that we're either learning or winning, right? We're either growing or winning, right? And what happens because we are, as humans, we're not only resilient, but we grow under stress, right? If you want to have big arms, you have to do a lot of curls, right? That's how you physically become bigger. We put our muscles under stress and they grow. If we want to become smarter, we put our brain under stress and it grows and we become smarter. If we want to become emotionally more competent, we put ourselves under stress and our brain grows and we become. If we want to become more spiritually uh, capable, we put ourselves under stress or we put under stress. So all of these stresses could be things we could look back and say, hey, that really sucks. Or maybe all those stresses were there for Amy to become the person she needed to become to now serve the way she's serving, right? And the reason she had to continue to suffer after she had written her book is because she had to write another book. And she had to become the person who's now ready to receive all the things that God is giving her the responsibility to receive so that she can serve the way that she's going to serve. So maybe it wasn't all the suffering that you went through that you shouldn't have gone through. Maybe all that stress was there so that you can become the Amy you are now. Give me your
Mm.
perspective on that, and maybe that's the prism that we need to look through so that we.
I totally agree. And I know that that's true. Like, I know that I had to go through all of this to be able to serve in the way that I want to and the way that I think I can best.
So now let's talk about the way your spirit spoke to you when you got your diagnosis, right? Because you were getting diagnosis after diagnosis after diagnosis after diagnosis. And it wasn't until you got your Lyme diagnosis that now your spirit said to you, this is what it always was. This
Yes.
is where we're supposed to be. And this is where we're supposed to serve, right? Isn't that really what your spirit was saying to you?
Yeah. But um it was an incredibly, I mean, it was so multifaceted because I felt so many things at once, but it also was so validating in that I had not given up on myself.
Yeah,
And
because giving up means that you're not growing. Giving up means you don't see all of this stress as the stresses that are allowing you to become physically stronger, emotionally stronger, intellectually stronger, and spiritually stronger, right? I mean, and you are all
yes.
those things, right? You are all those things, all right? And now that you have your diagnosis, now that you're where you're supposed to be, now that Amy has now been able to define the creativity that God put in her and to define that piece of it and her purpose. Now she goes through the final stages of her healing journey. So talk to us about that. Talk to us about the doctors you're working with and the kinds of treatment that you're taking and how that's now changed all of the suffering that you had to go through.
Um, so when I'm sitting there in that doctor's office, I said, okay, what am I dealing with? And he said, I really feel that if you treat this in the right order, I've been doing this for over 30 years. I've seen thousands and thousands of patients go through this, that we will get you to a point where you feel fully well. And the neurological damage, which I mean, I left out a whole part of the story, which is that I have a pretty severe motility disorder. And to the point where I almost considered having surgery to rectify that. And um, I'm so glad that I didn't, because now I know that Lyme
Me
can
too.
cause motility disorders. So, like he said, then we'll get to a place where we see what's left over. But I just fully trusted him. He was much more grounded than anybody I had ever seen, and simplified. It was just one thing at a time. And that's the only doctor I had seen this entire time that made it so easy. So, the first treatment that I started was A-Bart, a Byron white herb for Bartonella. I am very, very sensitive, and my detoxification system has suffered the most from late stage Lyme. So I had to go very slow. And when I say that I raised it a drop a week, I'm not kidding. I would get so sick from it. And at this point, I thought, why am I getting sicker? Like, I don't know if it's going to work. But he just kept saying to me, you will get to a place where you're at a whole new apex, and you're going to breathe and say, this feels like a different body. And I totally trusted him, and I did it. And after all of the suffering and the die off, once I got to the full dose, it lasted a couple weeks. And then I was out in Colorado, and I was like, wow, I don't know if I've ever felt this good. And I just felt this freedom and strength that I hadn't felt before.
And before we go further on your diagnostic journey, because everyone will get mad at me if I don't ask you two questions. The first
Okay.
question I have to ask you is, what testing protocol did the doctor use? What was it? Was it a specialty lab? And if it was, what was the lab? And secondly, you said you had Lyme and co-infections, and you just
Oh,
gave us
right.
another one, which is Bartonella. So give
Sped
us,
right past that. So
yeah,
it's Bartonella and Babesia and
okay.
Lyme. And the testing, I will have to go back and just triple check, but it was blood tests, IGenics, and Armin labs.
Okay.
And all three were conclusive.
All right, so you had the Armin Labs testing, you
Mhm.
had the Igenix testing, both specialty labs, brilliant labs. We've actually had the founders of both of those labs on the
Oh, wow.
podcast.
Oh,
So I
wow.
encourage folks to listen to our interview with Dr. Armin, who is a brilliant guy, and actually the Dr. Shaw interview, who is the principal of Igenix, is actually going to be released sometime in the next couple of weeks. We interviewed her over
Right.
at the ILADS conference. So, and then
That's
you had a
amazing.
third test that you don't remember the name of it, but all three showed you having Lyme, Babesia, and Bartonella, which is generally the three we're seeing over and over again, Amy, which is really interesting. And
Yeah,
that's
they
what it
seem
brings.
to be the heavy hitting trifecta.
Yeah, so what we're hearing from the Lyme disease doctors, the people who are treating this regularly, is when years ago when they were treating Lyme patients, largely what they were just seeing was again traditional Lyme, which was Borrelia, right? In a particular strain of Borrelia. Now we're seeing at least the three that you just mentioned, right? So we have not just one bacteria, but a really really nasty bacteria with Bartonella. Bartonella is nasty, right? And
Oh, yeah.
the impact that it has on folks emotionally is just horrific, right? And then, of course, you have you have this this parasitical disease, right? You have Babesia, right? Which of course is treated with malaria drugs in most cases, right? So you had the trifecta, right? And they just dogpiling on you, dogpiling years and years and years and years and years. And it's interesting that you even went to a parasite doctor who didn't pick that up, right? I
I
mean,
know.
that is interesting. Again, and I think Amy, it's a training issue, right? It's nothing other than a community of people who are well-intentioned, who are smart, who want us to be better, who want to help us to get better, and can't because they don't have the software, right?
Yeah.
They just don't have the tools, which is why I was building out. You can't see what you can't see, right? You can't diagnose something that you're not trained to diagnose. I don't care how smart you are. It's just a failure it's a systemic failure.
Mhm.
Um,
I
so
also think that it's important to mention that, like, probably 5 or 7 years before the book and the correct diagnosis, I did have a bullseye rash, and I was told that it was ringworm. So I know that a lot of people on here are going to be like, yeah, me too, but
yeah, no, it's very, very
yeah,
common, right? Even with a bullseye rash, and we do know a majority of people don't get a rash, and many people get rashes that are not bullseye rashes. But even bullseye rashes are often misdiagnosed as something other than a bullseye rash, right?
yeah.
Which is it is frustrating, but it does make the case that it's really a lack of training that's causing these issues.
Mhm.
Um, so let's now take the next step in your treatment protocol. So you treat the Bartonella, and it's a progressive process. And because you had been so sick for so long, you had to be very gentle with yourself. And talk to us about what you needed to do to sort of modulate the treatment, right? How did you know you were pushing it too hard? When did you know you could go up? And were you herxing? Were you trained on how to deal with herxing? What was that like when you went through this phase of your treatment?
I understood what herxing was, and my doctor was so familiar with I really have detoxification impairments from tick-borne illness, and I don't detox naturally in many different ways. And I knew that I was going to need support in that area. And so we came up with a detox plan, which I really took to the next level, where I realized that if I was stirring up all of these things in my system, I was going to need to really push it to remove them. Because a lot of people don't understand that you can't just a lot of people think they can just do the treatment and then just wait for it to get better. But for me, I really needed to make sure that I was removing things properly. And it was just our idea together to go very slow. And I'm glad that I did, because every time I would raise it just a drop, I would feel like I had the flu. And it would be like a 5 day period where then I would start to rebound. And I just did it as long as I could without getting too exhausted. And then I would take a break for a couple weeks and keep going. And I really had to exercise patience with myself and, treat myself like I was a child and take it slow. And that first tick infection, it was scary to just be like, well, what if this isn't going to do anything again? I always had these thoughts in my head like, well, what if it won't do anything and it's not worth it? And then I knew at the end of using the A-Bart and another drug called methylene blue that I just was like, he was completely right. I feel like I have an entirely different body. I have agency over myself that I have never had, a strength of physically and spiritually that I had just never felt. And I gave myself a couple months, and then I started the Babesia treatment. I'm doing an herb called Cryptolepis, which is an African herb for malaria, and also Artemisinin, which is the Chinese herb for malaria. And for me, herbs have worked very well because they're hardcore, but they're gentle enough and they're not too explosive for me the way that antibiotics would be on my situation with my gut. Um, and I would say the Cryptolepis die-off in Herx has been very hard for me. I thought I was strong enough to just push it way faster than the first one, and I got schooled. I learned very quickly that I had to slow my roll. So I'm now on a steady dose in the middle, and I plan to continue it soon and just go slower. But I already feel so much stronger. I think unfortunately, in our world, it has to get better before it gets worse. I mean, it has to get worse before it gets better. That's funny.
Yeah,
It's gonna suck while you're going through the treatment, but it really is worth it.
you're sharing something that's very, very important. So I do want to pause here, and I want to emphasize this. I don't want to just compliment you for being gentle with yourself and showing yourself grace, but I also I want to compliment you for the way you're articulating this. So one of the mistakes that many people make is they lean into the suck it up culture. They lean into trying to resolve this as a sprint rather than a marathon.
Yeah.
And in many cases, people get much, much sicker when they try to kill off too much too quickly. You know, one of the examples that we give all the time is our good friend Nick Turinsky. And I do urge all listeners to go back and listen to Nick's story. Nick was this gifted athlete who got sick, and he tried to kill the bugs too quickly, and ultimately put himself in a position where he became wheelchair bound, not by the disease but by the aggressive nature of the treatment, right? Whereas you're really beautifully describing this, where your mindset has to be that you'll do this at the pace that your body is telling you to do it, right? So you develop this relationship with your intuition, right? You did not trust your intuition. You realize that you were relying on doctors in ways that you shouldn't have, and it makes perfect sense. You're the daughter of a doctor, right? You're from a Western culture, right? And you finally made this decision. You talked about, I made the decision that I was going to take care of my own healing, right? And part of that was now listening to your intuition and understanding how important that is. And because you came back into with your intuition, and because you had the proper mindset, now you're gently treating this, and you're listening to your body, and you're only adding to the treatment when your body tells you you're ready to add to the treatment, right? And that's why you're having the success that you're having. And that has to be the model that everyone follows, right? Because if you don't, you're actually going to get sicker.
Yeah, that's so true. And I also think that it's really a beautiful experience once you have the right diagnosis and you're sure of it, to be able to, you're not just healing physically, you're healing emotionally, you're healing spiritually, you're reconnecting with yourself. I mean, a lot of people say like inner child work, but it's really like it's you and you. So a doctor can tell you what to do, but you're the only one who can really know what is the right pace and is the right choice for you. And I think that's very healing as a patient who, I know many other people listening, I'm sure, have given their power away to so many people.
Well, I mean, part of the reason why we give our power away, and I'm gonna use a different term. I want to debate this with you. We're becoming friends, so we can have these debates.
Okay.
Um, is I don't really define it as reconnecting, and the reason I don't define it as reconnecting is this suggestion that you at some point understood how your brain worked, how your body worked, how your spirit worked, and you lost that with the disease, and then you're reconnecting to it. And my argument is that, that our educational system just fails everyone, right, on so many different levels. And I think the way that it fails us the most is it doesn't teach us how to use the human operating system, right? There is a human operating system, and it's all largely driven by the brain, and our brain is actually going to control everything that happens to us physically, emotionally, and spiritually, but we're never taught anything about it, right? And what's happening is, through all of these experiential events that happen in your life, you're learning about the human operating system. You become not only aware of, but you learn how to control the human operating system. And as a result of that, you're now healing everything physically, spiritually, and emotionally. So
Mhm.
I'm arguing to you, it's not that you reconnected. What you did is you became an expert on the human operating system, in particular, Amy's human operating system.
Okay, I see it.
Or if you disagree, let's debate it. I mean, we can, as friends, we can debate that.
I just think that you lose a part of yourself when you're a patient and you um, are at the mercy of feeling like you need to do what a doctor tells you to do when you're feeling desperate. And so I think it's both. I think it's definitely what you said. And I also feel at the same time it's about reclaiming your your I I don't want to keep repeating agency, but it's
No, I love that term. You please repeat
you're
it. I love it.
you're re you're reclaiming your agency over yourself.
Right. But you're doing it in a way that you're much more competent, because what we do is we lose confidence in something we don't really understand. Like, we'll rely on our instincts, but we don't really understand what instincts are. And we lose confidence in something that has served us that we didn't really understand. But now you're different. You understand the human operating system. You understand how the brain works. You understand the impact that the brain has on people, has on you physically. You understand what emotions are and how they are your onboard diagnostic system, and they're giving you signals that you have to listen to and articulate to your doctors and your professionals and to yourself, and how
Yeah.
you're going to treat. You understand how you can now put your brain in a place where you can subconsciously connect with spirit, right? And you can now communicate with consciousness, and how that's allowing you to become not only the person you are, but the servant that you've become, right? And you are now the person that can receive this. You can reach through the curtain and receive this and bring it back to to this world, and you can now serve other people by sharing that, right? That's not reconnection, Amy, I would argue. That's a now very mature spirit that has all of these tools that she can use to heal herself, and then create a map for other people to heal as well.
Okay, you got me.
All right, I'll take the win. So, my friend, this is really a beautiful story. Talk to us about where you are today.
I am really halfway through my treatment, so I still have half of my Babesia treatment to go, and then I'll start Lyme. So I'm somewhere in the middle, and but I'm feeling better and better. And I know now that when I do the treatments, it's going to be hard, and I'm not going to feel great, and I'm going to need to support myself differently. But for me, it's been a lot about the second phase of healing, which is nervous system regulation and stress reduction and making sure that I'm eating well. That's a major thing for me and so many clients I see. It's also a way that you can empower yourself to make smart choices and learn about yourself. Like so many people have said, "Oh, I'm so sorry that this has happened to you." And yes, it's tragic. I mean, it's a tragic story
I
and it took
disagree.
me
It's a,
out of
it's a beautiful story. It's not a tragic story. It's a beautiful story.
Thank you. But it's painful and it was extremely isolating and lonely and there was really deep grief in it. And I also know at the same time that if none of it had happened, I would never have the depth within myself that I've found. I would never have the lifestyle that I live, that I'm so proud to live and that makes me feel so good. It's not about what I did when I was sick, it's what I do now to feel healthy. And I really take pride in these personal rituals that I do to make myself feel good. And I just want to continue to feel as good as humanly possible and be able to be the best wife, sister, friend, aunt, author, health coach that I can be. And it's a beautiful opportunity to be able to rise from the ashes.
So now, let's talk about the transformation, right? We talked before we came online about the journey of achievement and the journey of transformation, right? And you've now achieved this place where you are unbelievably articulate. You've been on this Zoom with me for 2 hours, It's unbelievable how smart and articulate and energetic and capable you are. So clearly you're doing very well, or we wouldn't be having this conversation 2 hours in, right? I
Yeah, we
understand.
really have become friends.
Yes. So I understand that there is some more kill protocol that you're going to go through where you're going to reduce the microbial load in your body, and you're supporting your immune system by helping it to reduce the microbes that your immune system is killing, right? But you're doing unbelievably well, despite not being at the end of that portion of your treatment protocol, right? And you've gone through an unbelievable spiritual transformation, right? You are a very, very different person today, as a result of this journey, right? And some of the conversation we're having together is I'm challenging you and I'm asking you to look at these things very differently than you articulated them to me as we were having the conversation, because I'm seeing this very differently than you are, right? I see a very different beauty in this experience and in you than we can often see in ourselves when we're not looking at the mirror, right? So talk to us about now this transformation. Tell us about what you've learned about you, what your creativity is, because you've always had a creative spirit, right? You've always been a creative. What have you learned about your creativity, the seeds that were put inside you when you were made, and how you're now being fruitful in a way that you would not have been at this stage in your young life had you not been on this journey?
I really would have to think about it, but what I can say off the cuff is that I my mom is highly creative. I was always around creativity when I was little. I loved dancing. I switched that to acting, and now many, many years later, when I never thought I'd give up on acting, I thought I'd be professionally acting for the rest of my life. My life just pivoted, and I took all of that creative energy and put it into my books, and that's where I think I was always meant to be. And I just didn't know it. Even after kicking sick, I thought, well, maybe I'll go back to acting. Or I always saw my life as before I got sick and after. And I could never see the connection between them until recently, where I started to think like, oh, well, this is my life. And this is exactly where I was supposed to be. And this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I actually love writing as much as I loved acting. And um, I don't know if I don't remember the question, to be
Yeah, so
honest.
no, so and I want you to talk about, I mean, that you're answering the question, which is you are where you are today, and you're serving the way you're serving as a result of learning about the different elements of your creativity, right? Every single human being is a creative because everyone is made in God's image, and because we're all made in God's image, and God is a creative being, we all have an element of God's creativity, but every one of us is different, right? And part of what makes life rich is that we're always looking to find that purpose, that creativity, who we're supposed to be serving, right? And you learn how to tell stories through your acting experiences, and now you're telling a very different story, and you're telling stories that are designed to help other people heal, right? You're becoming a model for healing, and you're showing people how to use the map that you've developed on this journey as a way of shortcutting their healing, right?
That's true.
And that's why you're coaching the way you're coaching, and that's why you're giving the presentation that you're giving, right? And look, and one of the reasons why I complimented you on your website, and the elegance of the website, is because each one of us has to serve differently, right? One of the things that we heard at Tick Boot Camp early on as a criticism is we're the heal or bust platform, right? And I can tell you that when I first heard that, it really pissed me off, right? And the argument was that we're not gentle enough. We're just healing or busting and pushing and pushing and pushing. And then I thought, you know what? That is who we are. We're two
Uh-huh.
guys from Long Island, and we're aggressive, and we push, and we are the Heal of Us platform. And that's not to say that we're the platform for everybody, but there are many people who benefit from that approach, right? Your approach, reminds me a lot of another very elegant approach from Ali White's Tick Checks. Very elegant, very
I love
polite,
Allie.
very, very clean, right? Your colors are clean, your approach is clean, your appearance is clean. You have this beautiful website, and that speaks to a different person who has different needs, right? And that's who you've become, and that's how you're serving. And that's in some cases, people have asked us, why do you promote so many different people? So because different people have different needs and different ways of communicating with different people works for different people, right?
Yeah.
And what, our approach and your approach are different. And it's not that's one is, one is right for one kind of person, one is right for another kind of person. That's why we need to highlight all of the diversity that's out there. And that's why it's important for us to highlight you, because you're different than us. And you do it different than we do. And you do it more elegantly than we do. And you do it more gently than we do. And that's what has developed through all this suffering that you went through, right? Isn't that true?
Yeah, it's true. It's
It,
true. And thank you. I'm grateful to be on
oh,
here.
and I'm grateful to have met you and to have you share this beautiful story. And I'm really grateful that you're going to be available to so many people that are going to listen to this podcast, and they're going to be healed just by hearing you. They're going to model you. So many people are going to model you that you're never even going to know that have modeled you. So many people are going to heal that you don't even know, because you were kind enough to come onto this podcast and share this really beautiful story and be vulnerable and cry and do all the things that you were willing to do. And then there is going to be a subset of people that are going to come and find you because they've heard this, right? And that's going to be really cool, and it's really beautiful, right? So thank you. I really, really am blessed by having met you.
I know. I feel the same way. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really grateful to have had this time
So now
together.
let me ask you the last question that we asked in the Tick Boot Camp, and you've been with me for more than 2 hours, so your family deserves you, even though I've stolen you for 2 hours. I'm going to ask you the final question, and this is actually the question that became the foundation of the Tick Boot Camp podcast, because as I had shared with you offline, this podcast in part was driven by an experience I had by interviewing very giving people who were willing to share their experiences with me when I was struggling for answers after I had a tick bite, right? And what I asked everyone during that phase was, what would you do if someone you loved came into the room after our interview? What would you recommend they do? And that became the basis of our Tick Bite Blueprint. And again, I'll share with folks on for the first time on this podcast. It's actually the basis of a book Matt and I have written that we're going to be releasing in May. So,
Congratulations.
so
It is
thank you.
not easy.
Yes, so it's been a long run.
You have to keep me
So
posted.
so let me ask you the question, right? Because so many kind people who were willing to answer this question became the foundation of our book, right? So let me ask you the question, Amy. What would you do? Your mom, I'm gonna ask you about your mom, right? Because she seemed like such a powerful force in this journey for you, and such a supportive force on this journey. So if God forbid your mother was bitten by a tick and she came walking in this room, in the room that you're in right now, right after this podcast, what would you recommend to that woman who is so beautiful and supportive of you on this journey? What would you recommend that she do so that she wouldn't get sick from Lyme disease?
I would do a couple things. And I guess prevention is a whole other topic that we could talk about another time. But I would say that she needs to thoughtfully, I'd probably want to do it for her, but she would need to thoughtfully remove the tick from the head out, save it in a Ziploc bag, contact her primary care or whoever she sees regularly immediately. And if it were me, because I get like straight to it when stuff like this happens, I would go on a course of antibiotics, send the tick to a lab, see what the tick has, and try to beat, if it's engorged on you, it's already been feeding for at least a couple days usually, or long enough. And what I know is that the other side is not worth it. It's not worth the wait and see. So I would just tell her to talk to her doctor about getting on antibiotics and just trying to like beat it to its course, and definitely get the tick tested. because that's something so many people don't think about. They just like throw it away. I literally was just in a doctor's, I was in some clinic. I was getting tested for COVID, and I overhear this doctor saying, "Oh, you got nymphed." And then he tweezes the thing out, throws it out, and says, "You're good to go. Just pay attention if you get any rashes." And the guy leaves the office, and I'm sitting there like having an existential crisis of like, what do I do here? I'm in the waiting room. This is not my office. I don't know him. I definitely don't know the guy that walked in. I'd never met this doctor before, but there's so much misinformation. If you are lucky enough to find the tick, test it. So many people don't get that opportunity, and it at least helps you. The more information you have, the more you can help yourself. And if you catch it in its acute stage, you want to clobber it. Don't mess around. That's all I have to say. That was coach mode. So I am straightforward.
Well, Coach Amy, I do want to end the podcast by giving folks information about how they can get in touch with you. So can you give us the your website, domain, and your social handles?
Yes, so you can find me on amykurtz.com or kickingsick.com. They both take you to the same place. And I am on Instagram _Amy Kurtz. Please come say hi to me. I would love to be connected and stay in touch, and hope to be able to help some of you along the way.
You already have, whether you know it or not, and I really thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule and taking time away from your family to share these really beautiful thoughts with.
I had such an amazing time with you. Thank you so much for having me. I loved meeting you, and I'm a huge fan of what you guys have built and what you continue to do. It's an ultimate service for people. You should be really proud.
Well,
And
thank
I'm
you.
able to be on it.
Thank you.